It's your bear here, and let me tell you what, I have got a treat in store for you today. I'm talking about Parasite Eve. When Parasite Eve was first released in 1998, it was simultaneously one of the most realistic games and one of the most absolutely insane games I had ever played. And it kinda still is to this day. The game is set in New York City, spanning the days between Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. This action horror RPG was Squaresoft's first rated M for mature game. Honestly, I was just immediately hooked by Parasite Eve's premise, its characters, the location, the genre, the music, the story, you just name it. I was probably way too young when I played this game for the first time, and that's another reason that it's left this kind of indelible mark on my brain. But really, everything about this game struck a chord with me, and I still go back and play this game just about every single year around New Year's. Parasite Eve originally started life as the concept for Final Fantasy VII, but a different version of that game that would take place in our modern world. Squaresoft would eventually go a different route for FF7, but they didn't end up scrapping the game. Instead, they turned their attention to a novel that had recently been released in Japan that was in the process of being turned into a movie. This story lended itself much better to the modern real-world setting that the developers wanted, and they were able to quickly adapt what they had done to fit this new game. As such, the game is loosely a sequel to that original novel and movie, but with completely original characters and in a totally new setting. If Square Enix ever went back and decided to remake Parasite Eve, which, don't get me wrong, I really hope they do, I would be terrified that they would take the same approach they did with the FF7 remake and lower the rating to try to reach a wider audience. Maybe I'm wrong. FF16 is getting a mature rating after all. But looking at what they did with the FF7 remake, don't get me wrong, it's a great game. It's amazing. But I was eagerly waiting to revisit some of the scenes and story beats from the original game, and I was more than a little disappointed when they just didn't hit the same way that they had in the original. But the rules were different for games in 1998, and that mature tone is a requirement for telling Parasite Eve's story successfully. So the story follows Aya Brea as she battles her way through New York City. Aya is a badass and stoic character. Think Samus Aran from Metroid without the advanced technological armor, but all of the attitude. Despite Square's attempts to overly sexualize the character, I mean, 2 of the 3 games have a shower scene in them for some reason. Despite this, Aya is still a great, strong female character. Opposite Aya is Melissa Pierce, who we meet in the game's opening scene, and that scene does so much to set up the characters, the story, and the music of this game. When we meet Melissa, it becomes quickly apparent that there's more to her than lets on. Melissa is in the process of turning into, or rather, being taken over by Eve, the game's main antagonist. During these opening scenes in the Opera House, Eve begins to take greater and greater control over Melissa's body, and that's when the game turns into a complete survival horror game. Despite taking place in modern-day New York, and sometimes coming across like a Biology 101 lesson, this horror story does not shy away from the weird or the horrific. The very first non-boss enemy that you encounter undergoes this grotesque transformation sequence, and that happens to all kinds of animals, people, and even viruses in this game. When I said this game doesn't shy away from the horrific, I'm not kidding. It shoves body horror in your face over and over again in the first 20 minutes, just to make sure that you're comfortable with what the rest of the game has in store for you. Maybe comfortable was the wrong word, but you get the idea. As I mentioned earlier, this game is a sequel of sorts to a novel by the same name, but you don't have to have read the novel or even seen the movie to understand what's going on here. This is a completely standalone story that just references some of the earlier material. The original novel was written by a Japanese pharmacologist, so the sci-fi aspects of the game are presented in a pretty realistic manner, at least as far as video games are concerned. Not all games can get away with the kind of ridiculous pseudoscience that, say, Resident Evil tries to pass off as believable. Don't get me wrong, I love Resident Evil, but some of their stuff gets a little ridiculous. And so does Parasite Eve. One of the other major aspects of this game is the music. From the opening scene to the final credits, this music is amazing. And that battle theme, oh, it is one of the best in gaming. Yoko Shimomura would be given more than a few chances to shine later on in her career, but the music in Parasite Eve is absolutely some of the best she's composed to date. It is this atmospheric techno horror rock opera masterpiece that just slams at every level. The soundtrack for this game has stuck with me through the decades. Another important part of the game is its setting. Taking place in modern-day New York City, it captures New York in the 90s so well. The game feels even more real because of how well they represent the city. From the Natural History Museum to Rockefeller Center to the Central Park Zoo, I mean, you can go and visit all of these places in real life and see how they were represented in the game. It's almost like the developers left little Easter eggs in the real world for us to check out. I really want Square to do something with this franchise. I mean, they did make 2 more games, neither of which stood up as well as the first one, especially the third one, but don't get me started on that. If they were to do a remake, I would be so happy, and there's definitely interest for it. If you search YouTube for Parasite Eve fan remake, you will find some really good videos and concept ideas for such a game. Next year marks the 25th anniversary of the first game, and I'm not saying Square Enix is bad with milestones, but if you were dating Square, expect for them to forget your anniversary a lot. I'm not going to hold my breath. I would be amazed for Square Enix to revive this series, but after the events of Third Birthday, I kind of feel they would have to do a complete remake or reboot for it to go anywhere that makes sense or felt good. So if you're listening, Square, I beg you, add this game to the list of games to remake. Look at the success Capcom is having with the Resident Evil remakes. They just announced the Resi 4 remake. You could do that too. You could, and you could just make money, and people would be happy, and the world would continue to spin. So Square, just do it. Come on, what have you got to lose? So what do you think? Will Square take the bait? Doubtful, but did you play Parasite Eve? And if not, why? It's a great game. Go check it out, seriously. Let me know in the comments below. As always, mash that subscribe button. It does help me out. And I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.